The night was cold and still as Mr. and Mrs. Smith crept through the shadows, their breath misting in the air. They kept their voices hushed, casting furtive glances around the dimly lit cul-de-sac. Asterisk, did you see anything on the cameras? Asterisk, Mrs. Smith whispered, her heart pounding. Asterisk, not yet. Asterisk, Mr. Smith replied, eyes glued to the tablet in his hand. Asterisk, but we have to keep watching. That bastard from the HOA is out there somewhere. Asterisk. Suddenly, a dark figure darted across the lawn, moving with unnatural speed. Mr. Smith gripped the tablet tighter, fingers flying as he tracked the intruder's movements. Asterisk there. Asterisk, he hissed, pointing toward the side of the house. Asterisk. He's going for the back door, asterisk. Without a moment's hesitation, the Smiths took off, their footsteps pounding against the pavement. They rounded the corner, just in time to see the hooded figure slip inside their home. Asterisk, call the police. Asterisk, Mr. Smith shouted, bursting through the back door. The intruder whirled around, eyes wild, a glint of metal in his hand. Mrs. Smith froze, her finger hovering over the emergency button on her phone. Asterisk, don't move. Asterisk, the intruder growled, his voice muffled by the mask covering his face. Asterisk. Core, I'll put a bullet in both of you, asterisk. Mr. and Mrs. Smith stood motionless, their breath caught in their throats. The air was thick with tension, the only sound the pounding of their hearts. The intruder's gaze darted around the kitchen, taking in the surroundings. His grip on the gun tightened, and he slowly began to back toward the door. Asterisk, where do you think you're going? Asterisk, a new voice boomed, and the Smiths' heads snapped toward the living room. A tall, imposing figure stepped out of the shadows, his eyes narrowed and his jaw set. Asterisk, Mr. Jameson. Asterisk, the intruder breathed, his voice trembling. Asterisk, I didn't expect you to be home. Asterisk. Asterisk, clearly, asterisk, Jameson said, his voice dripping with disdain. Asterisk, now, why don't you put that gun down, and we can discuss this like civilized people, asterisk. The intruder's finger tightened on the trigger, and Mrs. Smith's heart jumped into her throat. But before he could act, Jameson moved with lightning speed, lunging forward and knocking the gun from the intruder's hand. The two men grappled, their bodies colliding with a dull thud. Mrs. Smith watched in horror, her phone still clutched in her hand, as Jameson overpowered the intruder, pinning him to the floor. Asterisk, call the police. Asterisk, Jameson barked, his voice strained with effort. Mrs. Smith hesitated for a moment, then quickly dialed 911, her fingers trembling. As the Smiths waited for the police to arrive, the tension in the air was palpable. Jameson kept a firm grip on the intruder, his brow furrowed in concentration. The Smiths stood by, their hearts racing, unable to believe the turn of events. When the sirens finally pierced the night, the Smiths breathed a sigh of relief. But as the police vehicles pulled up and the officers swarmed into the house, they couldn't help but wonder. What had he stumbled into, and how deep did the corruption go? The flashing lights of the police cars painted the dark street in a kaleidoscope of colors as the officers swarmed the Smiths' home. Mr. and Mrs. Smith stood by, watching in stunned silence as the intruder was handcuffed and led away. Asterisk, what's going on here? Asterisk, one of the officers demanded, his eyes narrowed suspiciously. Asterisk, we caught an intruder, asterisk, Mrs. Smith stammered, her voice shaky. Asterisk, he broke into our house and Mr. Jameson stopped him. Asterisk. The officer's gaze shifted to Jameson, who stood tall and unwavering, his expression unreadable. Asterisk, is that right? Asterisk, the officer asked, his tone skeptical. Asterisk, and why was Mr. Jameson here in the first place? Asterisk. Jameson cleared his throat, his eyes meeting the officer's with unwavering confidence. I was making my rounds as the president of the Homeowners Association he explained calmly. I happened to notice some suspicious activity, so I came to investigate. The officer's brow furrowed, and he glanced down at his notes. The HOA president, huh. He muttered. And you just happened to be here at the right time. Jameson nodded, his expression never wavering. I was simply doing my duty to protect the community, he said, his voice dripping with self-importance. Mrs. Smith felt a chill run down her spine. There was something about Jameson's demeanor that unsettled her, a subtle arrogance that seemed to permeate his every word. As the police questioned the Smiths and Jameson, the Smiths couldn't help but feel that there was more to this story than met the eye. The way Jameson had so effortlessly subdued the intruder, the suspicious timing of his presence, it all seemed a little too convenient. When the questioning finally concluded, the Smiths were left alone, the silence in their home deafening. Do. You think Jameson had something to do with this? Mrs. Smith whispered, her eyes filled with concern. Mr. Smith shook his head, his brow furrowed in thought. I don't know. He admitted. But one thing's for sure, we're in over our heads. And the HOA is at the center of it all. As the Smiths contemplated their next move, they couldn't shake the feeling that they had just scratched the surface of a much deeper, more sinister web of corruption. In the days that followed the break-in, the Smiths found themselves caught in a web of suspicion and intrigue. Jameson, the HOA president, had been hailed as a hero for his role in apprehending the intruder, but the Smiths couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to the story. Something's not right. Mrs. Smith said, her brow furrowed in concern. Why was Jameson even there in the first place? Mr. Smith nodded, his eyes narrowed. And how did he manage to overpower that guy so easily? It just doesn't add up. Determined to uncover the truth, the Smiths decided to dig deeper, scouring the internet for any information they could find on the HOA and its leadership. What they discovered was a tangled web of corruption and abuse of power. Homeowners across the neighborhood had been complaining about the HOA's draconian rules, arbitrary fines, and heavy-handed tactics. Some had even reported instances of Jameson and other HOA board members using intimidation and threats to silence those who dared to speak out. This is unbelievable. Mrs. Smith said, her face pale. It's like they're running a mafia operation right under our noses. Mr. Smith nodded grimly. We need to find a way to expose this, to put a stop to it. But how? As they pored over the mountains of online forums and news articles, a plan began to take shape. The Smiths realized that they weren't the only ones who had been targeted by the HOA's corrupt practices. By banding together with their neighbors, they might just have a chance at taking down the seemingly untouchable Jameson and his cohorts. We need to get the community. The Smiths wasted no time in rallying their neighbors to their cause. They started by reaching out to those who had voiced concerns about the HOA's practices in the past, hoping to build a coalition of like-minded individuals willing to take a stand. This isn't just about our own experience. Mr. Smith explained passionately to a group of their neighbors gathered in their living room. It's about standing up for the rights of everyone in this community. We can't let Jameson and his cronies continue to abuse their power. One by one, the Smiths' neighbors began to come forward, sharing their own stories of HOA overreach and intimidation. Tales of arbitrary fines, unreasonable rules, and even instances of homeowners being threatened with legal action for the most minor of infractions. They tried to fine me $500 for having a basketball hoop in my driveway. One neighbor, a young mother, said indignantly. Asterisk, can you believe that? Asterisk. Another neighbor, an elderly man, recounted how the HOA had threatened to foreclose on his home if he didn't remove a tree that was blocking the view of a nearby street. Asterisk. It's not about maintaining property values or community standards, asterisk, he said, his voice trembling with anger. Asterisk. It's about power and control. Asterisk. As the Smiths listened to these stories, their resolve only grew stronger. They knew that they were onto something, that they were tapping into a well of frustration and resentment that had been building for years. Asterisk, we need to take this to the next level. Asterisk, Mrs. Smith announced, her eyes gleaming with determination. Asterisk, we need to get the media involved, to shine a light on the corruption and abuse that's been happening right under our noses. Asterisk. The neighbors murmured in agreement, their faces set with a newfound sense of purpose. Asterisk. But how do we do that? Asterisk, one of them asked, voicing the unspoken question on everyone's mind. Mr. Smith smiled, his eyes narrowing with a hint of mischief. Asterisk, leave that to us, asterisk, he said, his voice low and confident. Asterisk, we're going to bring this whole rotten system crashing down. Asterisk. With a renewed sense of purpose, the Smiths and their neighbors set to work, determined to expose the truth and take back control of their community. The Smiths' plan to bring the HOA's corruption to light quickly gained momentum, as they leveraged their growing network of disgruntled neighbors to capture the attention of the local media. Asterisk. This is a story that's going to resonate with a lot of people, asterisk, Mr. Smith explained to the group, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Asterisk, homeowners associations and their abuse of power is a hot-button issue, and we're going to use that to our advantage. Asterisk. The Smiths reached out to every local news outlet they could, pitching their story as a David and Goliath struggle against a powerful and unscrupulous HOA regime. They compiled a dossier of evidence, including testimonials from their neighbors, documentation of the HOA's questionable practices, and, of course, the dramatic events of the break-in and Jameson's involvement. It didn't take long for the media to bite. Within a week, the Smiths were inundated with calls from reporters, all eager to get the scoop on this juicy community scandal. Asterisk. We've got a local TV news crew coming by this afternoon. Asterisk, Mrs. Smith announced excitedly to the group. Asterisk. They want to do an in-depth interview and get the full story. Asterisk. The neighbors exchanged eager glances, their excitement palpable. They knew that this was their chance to finally shine a light on the abuses they had suffered at the hands of the HOA. As the news crew arrived and set up their equipment, the Smiths and their neighbors gathered, ready to share their stories. One by one, they stepped forward, recounting tales of intimidation, harassment, and the HOA's disregard for the well-being of the community. The cameras rolled, capturing the raw emotion and righteous anger of the homeowners as they poured their hearts out. The reporter, sensing the gravity of the situation, probed deeper, asking pointed questions about the HOA's practices and Jameson's involvement. Asterisk, Stowe. You're telling me that the HOA president himself was present during the break-in at your home? Asterisk, the reporter asked, her brow furrowed in concern. Asterisk, absolutely. Asterisk, Mr. Smith replied emphatically. Asterisk, and we believe he may have had something to do with it. The timing was just too convenient, and the way he was able to overpower the intruder was frankly unbelievable. Asterisk. The reporter's eyes widened, and she quickly jotted down a note. Asterisk. This is a shocking development, asterisk, she murmured. Asterisk. Well, be sure to follow up on that angle. Asterisk. As the interview wrapped up, the Smiths and their neighbors exchanged triumphant glances. They knew that they had struck a nerve, and that the media attention was just the beginning of their reckoning with the HOA. The stage was set for a showdown, and the Smiths were more determined than ever to bring down the corrupt regime that had terrorized their community for far too long. The media coverage of the Smiths' crusade against the HOA had a seismic impact, sending shockwaves throughout the community and beyond. Suddenly, the once untouchable Jameson and his cohorts found themselves in the unwelcome glare of the public spotlight. This is unacceptable. Jameson fumed, his face contorted with rage as he paced back and forth in the HOA's lavish boardroom. We can't let these troublemakers undermine our authority. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their own brows furrowed with concern. They knew that the revelations of the Smiths' story had the potential to unravel the carefully constructed web of control they had woven over the community. We need to take action, and we need to do it quickly. One of the board members, a well-coiffed woman named Mrs. Harrington, piped up. The longer we let this go on, the more damage it's going to do. Jameson nodded, his eyes narrowing with determination. I agree. We need to nip this in the bud before it gets out of hand. With that, the HOA board set to work, their collective minds racing as they plotted their counterattack. They would use every tool at their disposal, their deep pockets, their connections, and their willingness to play dirty, to silence the Smiths and their band of troublemakers once and for all. The first volley came in the form of a relentless campaign of intimidation. The Smiths and their neighbors began to receive a barrage of threatening letters, each one warning them to cease and desist their activities or face the consequences. They're trying to scare us, Mrs. Smith said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. But we're not going to back down. We have to keep fighting. But the HOA's tactics didn't stop there. They quickly mobilized their legal team, filing a series of baseless lawsuits against the Smiths and their neighbors, accusing them of everything from vandalism to trespassing. This is outrageous, Mr. Smith exclaimed, his face flushed with anger as he pored over the court documents. They are trying to bury us in paperwork and legal fees. The Smiths and their neighbors were suddenly thrust into a high-stakes battle, their lives and livelihoods hanging in the balance as they fought to defend themselves against the HOA's relentless onslaught. It was clear that Jameson and his cronies were willing to go to any lengths to protect their power and maintain their stranglehold on the community. But the Smiths were equally determined, their resolve hardened by the knowledge that they were fighting for something far greater than their own personal interests. The stage was set for an epic showdown, with the fate of the entire neighborhood hanging in the balance. As the legal battles raged on, the Smiths and their neighbors found themselves in a race against time. The HOA's relentless campaign of intimidation and litigation was taking a heavy toll, both emotionally and financially. We can't keep this up much longer, Mrs. Smith confessed, her voice laced with exhaustion. The legal fees are draining us, and the stress is starting to take its toll. Mr. Smith nodded grimly, his brow furrowed with concern. I know, but we can't give up now. We've come too far to back down. The Smiths knew that they needed to take their fight to the next level, to find a way to deliver a decisive blow against the HOA's corrupt regime. And as they pondered their next move, an idea began to take shape. What if we take this to the city council? Mrs. Smith suggested, her eyes gleaming with a newfound sense of hope. If we can get them on our side, we might be able to put enough pressure on the HOA to force them to back down. Mr. Smith's face lit up, and he nodded enthusiastically. That's brilliant. And if we can get the media involved again, we might just have a chance of swaying public opinion in our favor. With renewed energy, the Smiths and their neighbors set to work, reaching out to the city council and local media outlets. They knew that this would be their biggest and most decisive battle yet, and they were determined to leave no stone unturned. As the day of the city council meeting approached, the tension in the air was palpable. Jameson and the HOA board members arrived, their faces set in steely determination, while the Smiths and their neighbors filled the gallery, their eyes shining with a mixture of hope and defiance. When the meeting began, the Smiths and their neighbors took the floor, one by one recounting the horrors they had endured at the hands of the HOA. The city council members listened intently, their expressions growing more and more concerned as the testimony unfolded. Asterisk. This is a clear abuse of power, asterisk, one council member said, her brow furrowed with outrage. Asterisk. We cannot allow this to continue. Asterisk. Jameson and the HOA board members tried to defend their actions, but their arguments fell flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence presented by the Smiths and their neighbors. As the meeting drew to a close, the city council members huddled together, their voices hushed and urgent. The Smiths and their neighbors held their breath, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Finally, the council president stepped forward, his voice booming with authority. Asterisk. After careful consideration, this council has decided to take immediate action to dismantle the current HOA board and implement new, more fair and transparent policies. Asterisk. A cheer went up from the Smiths and their neighbors, and Jameson's face contorted with rage. Asterisk. You can't do this. Asterisk, he sputtered, his eyes wild with desperation. But the council president merely fixed him with a steely gaze. Asteriskio. But we can, and we will. Your reign of terror is over. Asterisk. As the Smiths and their neighbors erupted in celebration, they knew that they had won a hard-fought victory. But the battle was far from over, and they were prepared to keep fighting to ensure that justice prevailed in their community. The city council's decisive action to dismantle the corrupt HOA board sent shockwaves through the community, unleashing a newfound sense of hope and optimism among the Smiths and their neighbors. Asterisk. I can't believe we actually did it, asterisk, Mrs. Smith marveled, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and pride. Asterisk. After all the threats and intimidation, we managed to take them down. Asterisk. Mr. Smith nodded, a wry smile playing on his lips. Asterisk. It wasn't easy, but in the end, the truth and the will of the people prevailed. Asterisk. The Smiths and their neighbors wasted no time in getting to work on rebuilding the HOA, this time with a renewed focus on transparency, fairness, and community engagement. They carefully vetted potential board members, ensuring that only those with a genuine commitment to the well-being of the neighborhood would be selected. Asterisk. No more power-hungry tyrants. Asterisk. One of the neighbors, a retired schoolteacher, declared emphatically. Asterisk. This time, we're going to make sure the HOA works for the people, not against them. Asterisk. As the new HOA took shape, the Smiths and their neighbors began to see tangible changes in their community. Draconian rules were relaxed, arbitrary fines were abolished, and a genuine spirit of cooperation and collaboration began to emerge. Asterisk. It's like a weight has been lifted off our shoulders, asterisk, Mrs. Smith said, her voice tinged with a sense of wonder. Asterisk. We can finally enjoy our homes and our neighborhood without constantly looking over our shoulders. Asterisk. But even as the community celebrated their victory, the Smiths couldn't help but wonder about the fate of the former HOA board members, particularly Jameson. Asterisk. Do you think they'll try to come back and seek revenge? Asterisk. Mrs. Smith asked, her brow furrowed with concern. Mr. Smith shrugged, his expression pensive. Asterisk. I don't know, but if they do, we'll be ready. We're not going to let them take back the control they worked so hard to maintain. Asterisk. As the Smiths and their neighbors continued to rebuild their community, they knew that the road ahead would not be an easy one. There would be challenges, setbacks, and perhaps even new threats to overcome. But they were no longer the powerless homeowners they had once been. They were a community united, their collective voice and resolve strengthened by the hard-won battle they had just waged. And as the sun rose on a new day in their neighborhood, the Smiths and their neighbors couldn't help but feel a sense of optimism and excitement for the future. They had won the war against the corrupt HOA, and now they were determined to shape their community into the vibrant, thriving place they had always known it could be.